Do we need compression? How much compression is enough? Are we using enough of it? Do we need more? Do we need less? How much compression do we need for different genres of music? That's what we're going to be talking about in today's episode of the Working Audio Tools podcast. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Ed Thorne, and my affable co-host Paul Third is back, having had a week's hiatus, feeling better than ever. And Paul's going to lead today's charge because he's been investigating and I think appraising his approach to compression. Would that be right, Paul?
Yeah, I think after going through the last comparison that we did, there was a few comments being made, and I went back to the mix, and I think the few things that I took on board was many people were saying I think the snare's maybe just a bit pokey. Now, I'd already kind of sorted out the clipping side of it, and I remember when I gave it to our in-house mastering engineer, Marcel, he was saying, Paul, great job with the transients here, man. Like, I could push this thing loud if I want. But it was still pokey. So I sat back and I went, yeah, I could hear it. And I could hear that the snare was maybe getting in the way of the vocal. And it is something that I think Ed has made comment on quite a few times. And I think I had to kind of come to a point where I could hear it. I was thinking, like, at the time, I felt I couldn't hear it. But I thought a little bit more closely, and I kind of just went through the mixes a little bit and things I've done in the past and thought, right, let's listen to a few pro mixes. And, the same thing was coming up with the snares, where the snare had the punch, and wasn't really clashing with the vocal. Always seemed to have a little, I think I put maybe a little bit too much crack in it, or maybe not crack, maybe sizzle. Maybe I've got the top end there, but the mid-range is maybe just kind of fighting with the vocal a little bit, where a lot of snares I hear in pro mixes, sometimes, and again I hear it in Ed's, is that he can have a bit more of the fundamental, so frequency-wise you're not clashing. And then I think in terms of the vocal, people were saying, some people thought it was the perfect sound for country, and I think for country, I think I got away with it. But the reason I say I got away with it was because that was the right level to my ears. I wasn't genre-specific. I think I kind of just got away with that. And, on reference, listening to Ed's, there is a lot of things about Ed's, another love song mix, that I think works in terms of his balance. I think he did get in, he maybe felt it was a little bit too overly compressed to his ears. We weren't sure if that was track compression,
or
that was maybe, it was maybe limiting. Again, it's hard to say. But I think what I did like about Ed's is that I did feel that balance-wise, I think he got a better balance overall. I do think the whole mix glued well together. So I went back to the vocal and I thought, right, okay, let's have another listen to this. And it was more compression that it needed. And, I sat back and I was thinking, right, okay, so I fixed the snare to my ears and I fixed the vocal. And I was just sitting back, and again, I went to I think the drum bus as well, and the snare compression, and I went to the kick as well, and I just kind of did a little bit of tiny tweaks because I still liked the mix. And it surprised me when I got to the end of mix 2, and I'll let you all hear it, how a mix that I already thought was pretty well compressed needed even more compression. And it got me down this kind of whole journey of when I was ill. I've been really, really badly ill. So I just sat and watched like 18 hours worth of, audio interviews with Spike Sten and a lot of Jack Joseph Puig. Man is fascinating. The one he did with Warren is arguably one of the best. It's like 3.5 hours long, and I watched the whole thing. 3.5 hours. But what I found with these mixers is that compression is almost the key. It's not a secret. It's like it's a key to modern sounding mixes, and compression is very important because I think to get a modern sounding mix needs to have the energy, but it needs to be well balanced. And it is that kind of trying to find that balance of adding energy whilst not completely flatlining everything and it sounding lifeless. And I think that these pro mixers is what they have is this ability to hear compression in a way where they know how to use it to add excitement, but how to use it effectively to clamp everything down enough where everything's nicely balanced. So I thought I would just kind of share a few things that I did on this mix, let Ed hear it as well, and kind of see if it's maybe fixed a few of the things that maybe he didn't like. And it isn't me just reacting to comments. I would say that I could hear the benefits of the changes that I've made. Now, okay, before we get into it, we'll listen to it first. So we'll listen to a brief glimpse of mix 1 and then mix 2. And I want Ed to tell me if he can hear the changes that I've made and what I've possibly done. Because again, it might be a good test for some of you listening for your ears as well, just to see if you could hear the changes that I've made. So how about we get into that?
The world don't need another love song. Too many love songs don't come true. The world don't need another love song, and I don't need another lie from you. The world don't need another love song. Too many love songs don't come true. The world don't need another love song, and I don't need another lie from you.
The Working Audio Tools podcast is brought to you in association with our friends at DistroKid for all of your musical distribution needs. Don't forget, you can't just upload your songs to Amazon, Spotify, iTunes, or Tidal. You have to go through a music distribution service. There are many out there, but DistroKid is the one that Paul and myself use. They don't take any of your royalties. You keep 100% of the streaming revenue that you earn. For just $1.92 a month or $22.99 a year, you can upload unlimited songs. Your lyrics can be found in Google and other places. You get the blue Spotify verified checkmark, and you can create royalty splits between yourselves and fellow contributors. You also get access to the new DistroKid iPhone app for editing and uploading songs and accessing your statistics on the move. There are plenty of other tools available on DistroKid. We'll go through those in another section. Straight away, the drums sound a lot more aggressive, which I think is great. It's definitely taken the mix more towards the rock side of it, which I think a few people said about mine, but I think I liked it. The snare drum is bringing out more of the lower fundamentals, which is evening out the pokiness in the upper mid-range.
Yep.
The cymbals are better controlled, especially the hats. So, and the kick is more punchy. So you've obviously gone in and now what I think you've done is ignored the toms.
No, I actually did quite a bit of work to the toms, but it was more about the it was more about the sustain. I was having a bit of a play about with Kickshaper, and I was using Emra's tool to basically try and elongate the sustain and make it just a little bit more bigger. But I suppose at the end of the day, was it my big priority? No, the big priority was kick, snare. And yeah, I did work a little bit on the cymbals as well, but it was more the snare was the thing that because a lot of these in a lot of mixes, if you nail your snare, you're going to be in a good place, and obviously your kick and your snare. But I think the kick in the mix 1, I think I was a little bit light on the process, and I think I tried to be a little bit too all natural with it, and it needed that little bit of girth in the low end. It needed a little bit more click to kind of come through on lower quality systems, so I gave it that. And
compression's going to bring in that high end.
Now, what's interesting with the compression was I actually took the compression off the kick. Well, because in the pre-mixing side, I was using meld at M drum leveler, but in the first mix, I had compression going into the clipping. Where with this, I just had it the low frequency clip of the TDR limiter 6. So I was listening to it in and out, and I felt that the compression was just a bit needless. So I think the clipping worked really well just without the compression. And then on the snare, I used the trick that I picked up from Dave Pensado using Leapwing Dyne 1. Dyne 1 is essentially just like a multi-band compressor, but there's a lot going on underneath the hood. What I've done is I've pushed the compression in the mid-range, really where it's going to be kind of clashing with the vocal, maybe say like the 3-4K region. And then I'm compressing that more. I'm compressing the low end a little bit, so the kick is getting a little bit of compression on the drum bus, but that snare's definitely been brought down a little bit. And then I compressed a little bit of the high end as well. I think I only used 3 bands: the low band, the higher mid band, and then the upper frequency band. And I just kind of tweaked the 3 to taste, and I really found that was what fixed the pokiness of my snare, was basically on the drum bus just compressing the mid range and allowing the snare to trigger the compression, but to only really trigger it and mostly in that mid range, and bring that kind of mid range and that kind of mid range fighting frequency clashing area out. And then on the actual snare itself, I played about with the attack time. I think I had a 10 millisecond attack, which was giving me a snappy snare drum, but I was losing a little bit of the fundamental. And when I was experimenting and being the Paul Third geek that I am, I was doing like sweeps, and I was doing like looking at frequency analyzers just to see how much low end I was actually losing by making the attack faster and making it slower. And from taking snapshots, I was able to see just how much of the fundamental you take away, and a lot of that low energy you take away, the faster the attack. The more you clamp down on that initial transient, you're losing a lot of that fundamental. And I think what I did was I changed the attack time on the snare itself from 10 seconds to 20 milliseconds. And I was using my ear just to kind of listen to how much low end and how much that initial transient fundamental that I wanted to bring in. And I brought in a little bit more low end energy into the snare. And then on the drum bus, using Dime 1, I've clamped that kind of the range where it's kind of fighting with the vocal. And again, I've tightened the cymbals up a little bit with the high end.
Yeah, I can hear that.
What about the vocal? Did you hear any difference?
Well, hang on. Let's get to that, because I feel there's quite an important point to make about drums and compression, which is drums have this common misconception that they're very short, sharp instruments, and it's all about the initial peak transient. Now, yes, but the sound of a drum is in the time it takes the top head to push the air down through the drum, hit the bottom head on a snare drum, hit the snare wires, those to spring back, and then hit their top head, and you get that. That's how a drum, the air moving between the shell, is what creates a drum sound. And the sustain, although yes, relative to a harmonic instrument sustaining a note, is short, but we are talking longer attack times than the quickest compressor settings. One is it is a balance between catching a transient but letting the drum breathe. And because the note is taking more time to form, I would say, than just the bat at the start. Now, if you Andy Wallace and you're talking like fractions of a second, millisecond white noise samples to punctuate those transients, fine. Or if you're talking, hip hop and different genres of really punchy sounds using clipping, that's a different thing. But live drums, they're a living, breathing, organic thing. The notes aren't just ta ta ta. It's doosh. And then you've got the natural decay as the heads are settling. Toms spend longer decaying. So my approach for kicks is a reasonably fast attack. There's a very nice sweet spot between getting the transient without stifling it and just getting a little bit of the sustain of the body. The snare drums, for me, is usually a little bit slower again. And the toms, talking like 50 milliseconds before anything's
pretty slow,
kicking in, and then a slow decay. And what that is doing is you're letting because they're physically bigger, and the toms are very slow, the heads are usually tuned quite loose. So the heads are slow to move, slow to push the air through the drum, slow to get pushed back by the resonant head. You can get the sustain having a slower compressor lasting for longer. And that's where you can take a tom from sounding like doing to sounding doom. And if you get it right, it's really, really natural. The only thing I'd say about what you've done there, I think what you've done is a great improvement, and it's the energy you've caught. And compressors are very interesting for me. And I've really got this out of Justin at Hardcore Studios. He's got a great video on how using compression for energy, whether something's forward or backwards in a mix or not, totally transformed how I approach compression. But what you've done there is got things forward and energetic, which I like. The only thing I'd say, though, is the toms now, they seem to be the same level they were, which I would say in contrast to the kick and snare is a bit low and a bit distanced as a drummer. But that might just be a mixed preference of yours. Vocal-wise, There's a texture that's come out on the vocal now, and I'm wondering what compressor you've used. And I was racking my brain thinking, right, has he used a Fairchild? Has he used an LA2A? Has he used an 1176? There's a texture on an 1176 that comes out that I feel you may have used.
No.
No? Okay, excellent. Ed knows nothing.
Right,
But
so...
the vocals are consistently forward now, carving out their own space. I would say, and this has been hypercritical, possibly, and this might just be on my PSIs, which separates everything to the nth degree, as we know, and we've discussed regarding translation, possibly the vocals are now slightly too separated from the mix, which leads me to my next question, which is the drum instrument bus getting different compression to the vocal bus?
Yeah.
Which is a common thing, something I do as well.
I think what I wanted to do with the vocal was just to tuck it in a little bit more. And I was like, right, I could hear that I could push it a little bit more.
Level-wise, it's definitely in a better place, I think, than the last one.
And I tried a few things out, but again, it's difficult when you've got a mix sounding good and you know the mix is good. You don't want to go over the top, because if you go too over the top with compression, then again you could lose the entire character. So it was because
it's a
I'd
really
kind of
fine art.
Yeah, because I'd lent in to have the mix a certain way and I'd left quite a lot of dynamic range in the vocal. It was, it could be clamped a little bit more. So
Right, so put me out of my misery. What compressor did you use to get that additional texture?
Right, I used two. So I used on the main, the stay level one, or I think it was the LA2, whatever was the compressor that won the battle of the three. I put Waves Vocal Rider on it, and I got it to a point where it was just doing like 2 dB of movement. And I was very particular because I used to use it quite a lot back in the day, but I had it set in a way where
compressed before Vocal Rider and then compression again. Is that right?
No. So essentially, these three compressed vocals that I have in pre-mixing, they don't have anything on them, and they go to the vocal bus. So on the main vocal, because that's the loudest, I just had Auto Rider doing its thing.
Okay, but in theory, because you've done a level of compression in pre-mixing, you've done a layer of compression, and then in the mix session, you're going into Vocal Rider, and then you're compressing again after Vocal Rider, right?
Yeah, so normally on the vocal bus, again, I didn't even have any compression. Normally it's just the compression that's in pre-mixing. There's never hardly any compression that goes on, but on this mix too, what I tried to do was add just a little bit of Vocal Rider, so it's clean, because I know Vocal Rider's clean, and I just wanted it to have like a very kind of safe ride. I can't remember what I used it, but I would set it very specifically. Do you slow
or fast? Because I find it's clean in fast mode, but it can get a bit noisy in slow mode.
I can't. I would need to double check it. I think it's slow, maybe in the middle. I think it's a.
Well, it's one or the other on Vocal Rider.
I think it's, what do they call it? A gentle ride. I think I might have put. I think there's like a preset where it's a gentle ride.
Yeah.
And then I just set the level so it hits exactly the way I want it to hit it. So I'd set it in a way where it was intentionally, it would only hit like max 2 dB. That was it. It would only like kind of go up and down 2 dB. And then on the vocal bus, because then I'm bringing these three vocals together, I then used Emra's Fairchild on his vocal plugin.
That was my second guess after the 1176.
Because he's got a leveler and he's got a compressor. The leveler is essentially just RVox, but his interpretation making RVox better, as he said to me. He's like, I wanted to make RVox, but make it more
okay. I don't know
modern.
This plugin. Let's discuss.
Vocal shaper. So I'm now using that. I'm now using that for my air and the sibilance, because in vocal shaper, what he's able, it's his genius. And I knew about this a long time ago, and I was going to do it all myself. But what he's done is he's made a completely linear de-esser. So it's the way in which it, like, in my head, if I remember right, it's like he found it. Basically, we had this technique, and it made the two of us were like, that's it. Where imagine if you were able to isolate your S's, right? Now imagine you were to get a de-esser and use the solo mode, and you were and say like use your FabFilter Pro DS, and you were able to get Pro DS in a way where when you go into solo mode, all you're hearing is the S's. Then imagine you duplicated that, right? And then you flip the phase. right? And then you printed the track. What would happen? Those S's would all come out, but it would be completely linear and there's no compression. And what you could do is you could have it. You could have this thing where you could have one vocal track where all the S's are perfectly taken out linearly. But again, it depends on the detection and it depends on the quality of the de-esser. So then you'd have your S track, and then you'd have a track with the S's taken out. But if you were to put the two files together, they would be completely... So he's came up with an algorithm that basically kind of does that, and it's like very clean and very linear.
Wow, okay.
So yes, it's very, very good. So
you need to set Emra up with M. Maybe
I know I should do it. I know, Audio Geeks Unite.
Because I think M's considering his plug-in ideas again.
Is he? Right, okay. But yeah, I mean, that was something that Emra said, hold your horses and wait till I've made it, because that's what he's doing just now. He's like getting Kickshaper's been on every fucking kick I've done ever since he released it. And now I'm using his Air, because I was using Sugar from Process Audio, doing the Dolby A trick, and I found that his is way better, and then utilising that with his, obviously, his kind of linear kind of sibilance control. And he's also got the compressor, which is, like you said, is basically like a Fairchild. And I've just dialed in the compressor just on the vocal bus, so it's just, you can barely just see the meter tapping. So I just want it to tap maybe like 1 dB, maybe the most. So again, there's kind of, again, about a serial compression, a kind of. But so at the end of the mix, what I could hear was that the vocal now, in my opinion, sits in a little bit more. It's still forward enough, and that's, you just place your level, but I found that when I kind of tucked back that dynamic range a little bit more, the vocal felt a little bit less separate to my ears, maybe a little less pokey, and I felt level-wise it was sitting in the track better, maybe more akin to what you had. And then I think I didn't touch the bass. I think I maybe just touched the level of the bass a little bit. I either brought it up or brought it down like half a dB.
I have a feeling you took it down because I was A-B'd the two, purposefully listening for different things each time. Drums, right, that's what they're doing. Vocals, right, that's what they're doing. Guitars, no, Paul won't have compressed the guitars. Bass, as he changed that, something's different. And I think I can't remember, did you put it up or down?
I can't remember.
I think you took it down in the...
I think I might have took it down. It was one of the two, and it was just level. I didn't need any more compressing. But on the 2-bus, I kept it the exact same. But what I was learning was what I like about my diode bridge compression on the mix bus is that it is pretty fast, and it is naturally quite a fast compressor. I know because I measured it in Plugin Doctor. Of course I did. So I know its attack and release times, and even when you think you're sitting it slow, it's a pretty fast attack. And what I like about that, and I think it's the way I've always liked about the 33609 as well, is that I set them on the fast-ish side, where like Ed has the classic SSL thing where it's like completely slow attack and it lets all of that fucking transient in.
I've been playing around with that this week though.
Have you? Right.
Yeah.
So we can get to that. But what I like about having a little bit of a faster attack is that it allows that the track to be clamped just enough. I want the snare to be clamped a little bit, because if you have a slow enough release where you let the track breathe. Now what I do is I let my release move where, say like for example if it's a kick, it's the release is releasing back to unity just for the next hit. So again, if it's a snare, it's like, so imagine it was your compression, it would be like that. That's the way I want my release to be. I don't do the whole completely super fast release thing, because if you go too fast the release and too fast an attack, it'll just pump, and the last thing you want is your mix to sound pumpy, because it can fucking ruin mixes. It can add a lot of aggression, and it depends on what the mix needs. But that's something you do early doors. Like if you're like, you know what, I've got most of the tracks up and I want this track to be energetic, and I want it to be fast, and I want it to be urgent, then you would do that early doors, and then you'd mix into that, and you'd allow your other compression to tailor into that. And that's something that I tried to do with this mix, was that I know I wanted the compression the way I had it on the mix bus, but on the other tracks I had to realise, right, on the snare, I've kind of already got and by fast-ish attack on the mix bus, it's around, I think it's about 20 milliseconds, but I would say it measures more, maybe closer to 10, which some people may think is fast, but again, we're using your ears here all the time. And again, the diode bridge has a very, very, very soft knee. It's an adaptive soft knee. So again, it's not like a fast attack the way you would think a fast attack. It's a very smooth transfer curve. And again, I'm using my ears. Again, I'm not getting too bunged down with, oh my God, is it too fast? Is it too slow? And I think that's what many people get bunged down with compression, where it's just using your ears. And that's all I did with this mix. I was using the attack and release because I understand them and I understand how they impact on a drum, how it impacts the sound. On a mix, how it impacts the sound. Again, on a vocal, how it can impact the sound. And even remembering that, with a Fairchild, everybody has this thing where I think many people forget this, and everybody goes, yes, very amused, this really slow, gluey thing. It's not. Its attack is in the microseconds. Like a Fairchild's attack is super, super, super fast. That's why it was made that way, because it was made, from my memory, it was made, like the Fairchild was made because there weren't many compressors at that time that could really snap down on initial transients, because compressors were pretty slow. The Altecs were pretty slow, and it's something where I'm now thinking, right, if I'm going to be using a Fairchild, I understand it's got a super fast attack, but it's got very slow release times. And when you use the time constant on the Fairchild, that's your release, is your time constant. But it's still very slow. So the way the Fairchild works is it'll clamp down very fast, but it's got a slow attack, and it only gets slower, which can work quite well on vocals because you can really clamp down on those kind of fastest transients, and then again just use a slower release. But you've got to be careful with a Fairchild, because with it being so slow, if you compress too much, it's really audible. And I normally find if you are going to do a Fairchild, again, maybe at the end, I know Spike Stent and other guys use it, and a lot of them use the Puigchild from Waves. It'll maybe just be a dB. But again, it's just final tucks. And that's what I found about compression, is that it's a hard balance to get. But if you use your ears, you'll always end up in the right place. Don't look at compression as something, well, so-and-so does it, and they're doing 5 to 7 dB gain reduction. And Dua Lipa, he did 20 dB gain reduction, so I'm going to do that. No, it's important, but when me and Ed are compressing, we're using our ears, and you should always use your ears, and that's what I did on this mix. And again, I would like to think that by taking a bit of time to the mix, I was able to make it a more condensed little package. And Ed's was like, I actually think you added more energy to it. Yes, I've changed maybe the character of the vocal. That's going to happen, especially if you're using like a Fairchild style compressor. Again, I don't know how loyal Emerald was in regards to like the frequency response of like whatever they would have modelled, but a Fairchild has its own sound by just passing through that box.
The relationship between EQ and compression is so intertwined like that. It's unbelievable. Mm-hmm. Which is why you've always got to experiment with EQ before and after. The Fairchild, though, because of that super fast attack, I use that as my parallel vocal send. Because if there are any sibilants or plosives, what I don't want is them coming through on a parallel, because the parallel's too slow to pick them. I want that parallel to be fucking level and pushed in as much as I want. So the lead vocal is accentuating the dynamics of the performance rather than that being doubled up by the parallel. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I think what's important, why I want to make this video, was reminding people that modern records, compression is so important. Most of the times it will be in parallel, but you've still got to be able to train your ear to when things are too far. Like, many people may look at me and Ed's mixes and go, oh, that's maybe quite a bit of compression. I think it's like moderate, in my opinion. Again, many people stack compressors in series, because the thing is with compressors,
like
if you've not
doing a dB at a time,
if you've not got a good compressor, like say to me a stay level, right? You can get something like a stay level, and like again, when I'm doing my vocals, I'll hit it like sometimes 10, 15 dB, and it can handle it, but not every compressor, especially plug-in compressors, can handle it. Like again, that's why I go with Tim Petherick, because the man knows compressors. He knows how to do it in plug-in form. And I do find that, especially with some plug-in compressors, if you try and do too much with just them, they'll choke. And what I mean by choke is that the compression's very audible. And once you get audible compression, there's no way of fixing it. When it's in there, it's in there. So what a lot of people do, I know Tura does this as well. Tura Medina, again, he will layer compression in series. So, and again, it might be different attack and release times to do certain things. So
Yeah.
it's compressing, but it's so at the end of the day, me and Ed never want to get to a mix and somebody goes, "Oh, that vocal sounds compressed." You should never, ever, ever say that. All you should be able to say is the vocal's too loud or it's too quiet. As soon as somebody says to you, "Oh, that vocal sounds a little bit compressed," you've over compressed it.
Yeah, it's almost as if compression needs to be considered like effects.
Yeah.
With live sound, I was always told, effects need to be felt more than heard, and I had that hammered in, and that's always been my approach for effects, besides choice moments of accentuating things. If you can hear compression, it's gone wrong somewhere. The other thing to consider with parallel compression is phase shifting. For example, if you're using a different compressor on a parallel that colours the vocal in a different way, that can cause some strange phase shifting when they then get fed back into the same output.
But at the same time, as Dan Worrell said very rightly in a video, don't fear the phase shift. You know what I mean? Use your ears. You'll know straight away if something's going to work.
Yeah, you'll know if it's a good or a bad shift.
Because
or
trust
not,
me, those who are listening, like out of all the research I've done, out of all the books I've done, out of all the hours and hours and hours of interviews I've went through, parallel compression is a massive thing. If you want choruses to kind of lift, again, they'll do it on the drum bus. Again, Spike Stent will have different, EQs and sometimes different compressors for different parts of the song, be it verse, bridge, chorus. There's some people that do a rear bus, and it's something that I'm like, because I watched Spike's like whole thing again, like that one thing I sent you, Ed, where it says this lecture that he did. I can't remember where he was, but I watched it again, and it's probably the fourth time I've watched it, and I've got a note in my phone of certain things just to kind of remind myself. And rear bus, I think, is something that Spike does. Maybe he did it at the time. Maybe he does do it or he doesn't do it.
But by rear bus, do you mean a parallel master bus?
Yes, and it's something that I was always very wary of. The first time I heard about it was Andrew Sheps. I think it was in 1176. And when I thought about, if Spike does it, then, and I think it was pretty heavy. And when you're doing the rear bus, it is heavy. It might be 10, 15 dB of compression. But what I always think now with compression is we're always using my ears, and the thing that they talk about is energy. Can you add energy? What kind of tone can you add to this? Is it harmonic distortion you want to add? Is it just like the energy? Is it glue? And I might try going back to the rear bus thing and maybe adding it in choruses or maybe certain things
I used to do it.
Maybe I feel need it, yeah.
Yeah, I used to do it, and then I backed off the idea because I felt like it was making things a bit murky. It can make low end murky if you're not careful. But maybe I wasn't compressing enough, because if you absolutely flatline it and then have it there and then bring it up for the chorus, I do need to try that again. But since I've been using God Particle, I just don't feel like I need any back.
But I think something that I do want to make clear to people that are listening, this is very genre specific. Like the journey that like me and Ed are on right now.
There's no compression on jazz or classical, like barely any.
And when I speak to guys like Emra, and I do speak to other guys that work in like hip hop and genres that are very beat dominated, a lot of the times the beat is sacred, and like if you start going away like just like over compressing or compressing certain bits at all, your producer's going to be pretty pissed off, because Emra tells me a lot that Paul, and a lot of the stuff I get is already compressed by the producers. And I know that a lot of what Nicholas from Panorama Mastering gets, again, it's very much like, right, here's the baby, I'm giving you the baby, here's the beat, just enhance it. Like, it doesn't need like bells and whistles, it shouldn't need dynamically controlled. That's my job as the producer. And I think what people have got to remember that in these genres, like the beat has a lot of time spent on it.
Yeah, but that's also if you're working with ideal clients and producers who know what they're doing.
Yeah, true.
some of the stuff
Yeah.
I've had, and I'm sure
Yeah,
you've
so
had the
you get
same.
some
It's
shitty
just
beats,
been
my God.
okay, yeah, this is going to take all my tools in the toolbox to fix this. So something I learned about compression this week, I'm doing a mix for Mike Enger of the Creative Source channel. Wonderful YouTuber, if you don't know him. He focuses on Studio One and Cakewalk. He's got 2 channels. Doing a mix for him. He's a guitarist, singer, and first revision came back, acoustic guitars too compressed. And I was like, okay, I was going for like maybe 3 dB of compression. Fine, he's got good ears if he's hearing that. Cool. Took it back to like 1 dB. I also cheated slightly. I had Waves MV2 going because it was a very dynamic, expressive acoustic guitar part, but it was almost, in my opinion, too loud and then too low relative. So I tried to bring it in the middle. So MV2 was doing like 3 dB, took that back to 1.5 dB, sent it in back. Next revision, guitar's still too compressed. And I was like, what the fuck's he on about? Right, okay. Listening back, I kind of know what he means. So I took MV2 back to just a decibel of upward compression. Made sure that the 1176 was 1 dB in the verse. And he said he was happy with the attack and release times, but I could hear what he meant at this point. And I realized it was the dynamics section in FabFilter Saturn where I was adding saturation to the upper, the mid-range and top end above, I think, 240 hertz. I had it at.
Right.
And I had the dynamics set quite high on that. Maybe I'd have to pull it up, but pretty high. And then I played with that, and instantly I was like, okay, that's what he's hearing. It's the forwardness of the saturation in all that the mid-range and the upper mid-range that he was hearing that he didn't like. And then I've taken that back. I haven't had his feedback yet from this second revision, but I think I've got to the bottom of what that is. So something that I didn't even consider the first revision time round was a problem because I was looking at the compressor and the MV2, but it was to do with the saturation. That was, I think, putting it a little bit more consistently forward and leveled than he was wanting. So yeah, something as simple as that caught me out, and then I fixed it, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's what's important to push forward from this episode, is that you've got to teach yourself what too much compression is, and you've got to teach yourself.
The Working Audio Tools podcast is brought to you in association with our friends at DistroKid for all of your musical distribution needs. For a little bit more, $39.99 a month, you can have 2 artists on your roster, which includes everything just mentioned. Additionally, synced lyrics in Apple Music, further streaming analytics statistics. You can create a customizable record name. Mine, for example, is Ed Thorne Rhythm and Records. And you can customize release dates, pre-order dates, iTunes pricing, and again, much more. Now, if you're an artist manager or a record label, the Ultimate Bundle gives you up to 100 artists for just $89.99 a year. And you get 1 terabyte of instant file sharing, which is useful, but also contact information for thousands of playlist curators on Spotify. This is really useful so you can pitch your artist music to playlist curators around the world. Only available in the Ultimate Bundle from DistroKid.
Like, for example, in this mix, I could have got away with it, but I do think in hindsight that the snare was too pokey, and that's telling me that, right, my ears should be like, right, that's pokey, that's dynamic range. You know what I mean? I'm clipping it already, so I'm like, right, okay, it's pokey, that's dynamic range. Again, if the vocal is too loud in a certain part, that's dynamic range. And again, you don't need to compress all the time. Again, you can use automation. Don't be afraid to use automation. But, compression, I do find, is if you set things right. And I think that's what's quite nice about the Waves Vocal Rider, that you can set it in a very specific way, where when it hits that certain type of threshold, it will bring it, up or down.
Yeah.
And, so I'm going to keep on kind of with that when I've got these 3 vocals in the premix, and maybe I didn't give them enough compression. Maybe I was a little bit too much backed off, which is why it's important to then think about compression further on. Many people do this thing where they compress in solo, and it's just it's like, I think many people think, yeah, it's like dynamics is dynamics, and I could compress everything in solo. No, always compress in the context of the whole mix, because what Ed was listening to 2 weeks ago was the whole context of the mix. He was saying, right, in relation to everything else, I feel like the vocals may be a bit too up front. The snare is too pokey for me. The kick isn't enough in the mix. I mean, you might listen to the kick on its own and be like, yeah, this kick sounds fucking banging. But then you put it into context with the rest of the low end of the track, and all of a sudden, it's hiding a little bit. Oh, actually, this thing needs a little bit more click to kind of punch through. And, how you do that, there's different ways of doing that. But I think dynamics in a professional mix, nailing compression is very important. And in terms of acoustic genres, things when you're dealing with acoustic drum kits, and again, it could be country, it could be pop, it could be rock, it could be an acoustic songwriter. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, you need to give the track the compression that it needs. And, when it comes to adding more energy, again, think parallels. Because the reason I realised that parallels were so important is when you think about parallels, it's not difficult. I'm not about to tell you how to do a parallel. Right? If you don't, fucking type in YouTube and there's a million fucking videos on it. But if you think about if you want, for example, that you've got a certain sound that you want and you don't like the attack and release time, right? Imagine you're like, I need to do like maybe 10, 15 dB of compression, right? But you're like, if I have my attack time too fast, it's gonna choke it. It's going to choke it a little bit and it's going to be pretty audible at certain points. What you can do is you like as what Ed said with the Fairchild, it's got microsecond attacks. You could go in with a really fast 1176 if you wanted in parallel and choke it and bring that up just so it's giving you the sound that you want. It might be glue, it might be a little bit of energy in a certain range. But what it means that the main vocal is intact. In terms, it's not being choked. You can add the choke, but you can just bring that choke into taste. And I think that's what parallel compression is. It's to taste. Everything's to taste, and it's all about listening to the track and thinking, right, it's very well balanced. I've got, like, dynamically, I've got, nothing's really poking out too much. Right, but I need it to add a little bit more energy. And how could you do that? You could use parallel compression. You want to add a little bit more energy in a chorus, like what I do with drums, add quite a bit of parallel compression with 1176. Or again, it could be, I think, on my phone, I think Spike's got as much as 3 parallel compressors on drums. 3 different compressors, 3 different channels. And I think he does it to taste. And he just rides the faders. Sometimes he won't use all 3. He might just use one, but he EQs them differently. He's not scared of the phase shift. But these masters of the game have a wonderful, and it's masterful what they do, technique of compression. They know how to hear for it. They know the basics of attack and release. They understand ratios. They understand, the effect on how an attack and release can have on a certain source and when to abuse that. They know when to EQ into the compression. They know when they want to trigger it and when they don't want to compress and trigger it. They know what they want to trigger it. That's why you can EQ pre and post. And I think that's when you're in the genres that me and Ed are kind of pushing, these kind of more acoustic genres, I do find that nailing compression and understanding how exactly to use it to make your mixes sound completely upfront and exciting is, one of the biggest things that you could do after you've nailed the basics. Obviously, the most important thing is get a fucking balanced mix first. Use compression just to give you balance and just to make sure that dynamically everything works together as one cohesive piece. Then you could start to play about with things. Then you could start to play about with mix bus compression, right? I want the whole mix to have a certain type of sound, right? Okay, you can play about with mix bus compression. Okay, I want to influence the choruses. I want to make the vocal a little bit more energetic, right? Play with parallel compression. Parallel saturation, as Ed said about, saturation, you got to remember that saturation in itself can have its own form of compression. If we think about clipping, what is clipping? Clipping is wave shaping, which is adding in distortion. You're saturating the transient. That's what you're doing. It's all saturation. And when you realise that all of this has a relationship to one another, you then start to turn your mixes into these, these slamming, upfront and, you know, energetic tracks that, you know, your artist listens to and are like, wow, you really transformed that track.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, that's what I was learning whilst I was ill, was I was able to use compression to, you know, manipulate it to get energy and certain things, but I was forgetting the importance of just how important balance is. And sometimes you've just got to sit back and go, right, that needs reined in a little bit, and don't be afraid, you know, to, again, don't look at the meters. Like, one thing I found, I love it, was again, CLA was talking about it, and I think Jack Joseph Puig was talking about it, where a lot of these mixers would put pieces of paper over the VU meters because certain producers would come in and be like, oh my god, the thing's fucking, it's fucking pained, and they're just like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Like it's getting me a certain sound.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Even when I sent Ed, it was a Tom Lordalgie mix session, and sometimes like, there was one on the snare, he was fucking pinning it, like fastest attack, fucking pinning it, and he was like, I don't give a shit. I'm just trying to get the sound that's in my head. If it needs fucking 10-15 dB compression, it needs 10-15 dB of compression.
Yeah.
But it's how you train your ear and learning that compression is so important, but it's also important to know when to leave stuff alone. Because there's times that I won't even compress something. For example, on a guitar bus, yes, there are many big mixing engineers that will compress a guitar bus. If it's distorted electric guitars, I don't know, it's just something I don't do. They're already compressed as it is. However, if I want to add more energy, or if I want to give it a certain sound, then again, you can manipulate the attack and release to give you a certain sound. If you want, you know, something as simple as the guitars to have a little bit less low end, you can go in with a super fast attack and shave that transient in and just fucking clamp it maybe like 3 dB. And you know what I mean? You can take out that low end instead of just using a high pass filter. You can do it dynamically. Or again, you know, you could do the opposite. If you want to like enhance, you know, you want to kind of clamp the electric guitars down, but you maybe want to give them a little bit more body, you can use a really slow attack and let the, you know what I mean, let that initial kind of like that low end come in from the rhythm guitars. There's lots of various ways of doing it, and
I think exactly that what you're highlighting there that these masters have is, for example, with your snare drum, there's so many ways you could have treated that pokey forwardness. One with EQ, dynamic EQ, multi-band compression, broadband compression to flatten that down and bring up the lower end in the snare drum, which kind of sounds like what you did. Clipping, saturation, I suppose. Well, you'd get that from clipping, but yeah, there's or parallel to bring up. You know, you could EQ a parallel and bring up the fundamental. Something I've done on vocals before. If classic singer, when they go higher, they move the sound back to the back of their voice like that, and they lose all the low end. But what you can do on a parallel, and this will be why someone like Spike EQs different parallels, is
totally.
he'll band pass like the low mids on a vocal and just bring that in for the chorus. Underneath the singer doing that, they're also getting this. And blending them in together means you've still got a thick, full vocal sound in the chorus when actually they're singing like that.
Yeah.
So, but being aware of all that and understanding how to manipulate stuff, that's what's fascinating for me, and fascinating discussing this kind of stuff on the podcast.
And I think what makes it even more confusing for people is that you've got all of that, but there's so many ways to skin a cat. So then you get into the whole point where, should I use a VCI? Should I use a Vari-Mu? should I use an optical compressor? You know,
use what sound good and what works.
Exactly.
Fuck
I
YouTube.
think, you know, yeah,
everyone has an opinion. Do what you think works. Do what the client likes.
Yeah, I know what their tone box is, right? That I like see a lot of the times a compressor is a compressor, right? Yeah, some of them will have a certain transfer curve. You know, some of them will have a certain style of compression. But at the end of the day, right, if you need to compress something, just fucking pick a compressor and just get it to sound the way you want it to sound. Think about your attack and release. I always think you should do everything with a purpose. Always have a purpose, right? If something sounds too pokey, then right, think about, right, what am I going to do to control that? And like, don't go, but my favourite mixer, like he uses the SSL dynamic fucking strip in there. I think I should use that, but I like the sound of this thing that's fucking manipulating it a certain way. I mean, go with that. Like, just like at the end of the day, as mixers, right, you need to create a toolbox which is what all these guys and girls and thems and theys have, is they have a toolbox of tools and they just go, right, okay, I've got this certain sound that I want, and I want to manipulate it a certain way. Right, okay, I'll pick that. They understand the compression, they understand the attack and release time. They know if it's too fast or it's too slow, or if it's, you know what I mean? They know the sound of it. They know if it's going to have a little bit of a low end bump. They know that if they hit it maybe fucking 5 to 7 dB, it's going to fucking saturate a bit too much, or it might saturate a certain part of the mids. You know, it's all about just working on the fly and not overthinking it. I think many people overthink it, especially the way YouTube is, where, you know, I would like to think me and Ed don't overthink it anymore. We just go, right, that's how we work, right? There's bass, right? The bass needs compressed, right? Okay, I'm going to fucking compress it. I'll use double tap. I use double tap and I don't even think about it. I get it to hit it the way I want to hit it, and I move on and I don't think about it again, unless I'm in the context of the mix and the bass is maybe sounding a bit too dynamic, right? Okay, then I'll use another compressor just to tuck that in. And it's just, don't overthink it, you know, just have fun. And I think that's what a lot of times that we forget about mixing, is that it's meant to be fun. You know, and it's meant to be experimental. You know what I mean? Okay, don't experiment on a client. Still have a process that you work with. But, you know, don't be afraid to have a mix where you're like, oh my God, I've not compressed this at all. If it doesn't need it, don't fucking touch it. You know what I mean? Listen to the mix. And if it needs fucking 15 dB, give it 15 dB. If it needs a compressor you just put that compression on, you're like, oh my God, oh no. Like, people tell me, like, I had this conversation with Ed, it's like, a lot of people will say, oh, you can't use an SSL G-Bus like the way you've used it. Use it with a fast attack. My God, everybody does it. It's a slow attack. Guess what you do? You let the transient in. There's loads of engineers that use an SSL G-Bus and fucking they've got pretty fast attack. And again, they've got the fastest release. It's just about what you want to achieve and being able to be your own mixer. But yeah, I just thought I'd make this video because I found it interesting that I'd already thought I'd had enough compression, and really all I felt that it needed for the track to sit a little bit better for me and a bit more of akin to the balance that Ed had was just to compress a little bit more, and I wasn't scared. I wasn't scared to change the attack setting on the fucking snare. I wasn't afraid to play about with the vocal and add more compression to the lead vocal. Like, oh my God, you fucking more compression on the lead vocal. You've already got 3 compressors. And like, fucking give a shit. Like, I did it and I feel better about it. And then that's it. You move on. Yeah. So yeah, that's all I've got this weekend. And that's just, thought I'd just get straight into it, geek out. And that's my thing on compression. So how much compression do you need in a modern record? I'd say it depends. It depends on the genre. Loads of it. Fuck it, loads of it. You need a shit ton. It just depends, but don't be afraid of it, and be cautious that if you want upfront energetic sounding mixes, in a lot of cases in terms of the mixers that we look up to, there's a lot of compression involved. There is, and they'll tell you if they fucking love it. They love compression. You will get the jazz guys and the guys out there that are like, yeah, minimal EQ, I hardly compress anything. Yeah, try getting that
the
fucking super loud for a mastering engineer.
The jazz and classical things are different though, in that really you're getting the sound of the recording at source, and you're balancing everything on the way in. That's the
sound of the genre, you know what I mean? The sound of the genre isn't fucking -8 lofts. the sound of those genres is full dynamics. They want to hear the quietest and the loudness.
I do wonder what Miles Davis would think about LUFS if that was a thing when he was around.
Fucking
I think my parting note on this actually comes from a friend of mine, Sam Wilcox, who is a wonderful guitar player, who asked me, he said, recommend me an 1176 compressor that isn't expensive, and the only ones that came to mind were the UAD ones, or the Waves ones. And then I said, do you know what, mate? He's in Logic. I said, in Logic, they have quite well sampled all the major compressor types from, your FETs, your Optos, your Verimuse. They've labelled them, in their own way. I think they have labelled them FETs and Optos and whatever. And I said, just go through those and learn how each one sounds. And that would be my takeaway for the day. I'm sure every DAW has their own set of stock compressors. They're all modelled on something, unless they're like Fab Filter and they're just creating their own compression. So explore, experiments. And on that bombshell, for me, it's been emotional.